Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Justine Hampton, and I am the Community Voice Program Director. You are going to be so filled tonight with the information that you are about to receive in this dynamic webinar. We have two great panelists and a moderator that will keep the flow going and be very informative. I just want to give you a little background on the Community Voice Program. The Community Voice Program falls under the umbrella of the Sickle Cell Foundation of Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast Incorporated. The program is funded and supported by Children's Services Council of Palm Beach County. The Community Voice Program is entering its 13th year in Palm Beach County. To date, we have educated close to 7,000 Palm Beach County residents who live in certain zip codes in the following areas: the Glades, West Palm Beach, Delray Beach, Boynton Beach, Riviera Beach, and Lake Park. The mission of Community Voice is to provide basic perinatal health information and promote positive health behaviors to improve the birth outcomes for predominantly African American communities. If you would like more information regarding the Community Voice Program, please visit our website at www.sicklecellpbc.org, or you can reach the office by calling 561-840-4132 to learn how you can become a Community Voice graduate and advocate. So once again, thank you for joining us this evening. Sit back, relax, and just embrace the information you're about to receive. Have a great evening.
Good afternoon. I'm J.R. Thicklin, Community Voice Lay Health Educator. And as you've heard Justine say, tonight we're taking upon a very important subject. As you know, the month of October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, a month in which nationwide we recognize through extensive awareness and education the issue of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a very complex subject in our society, and no one is exempt from it. And yet still tonight, we decide to focus particularly on the intersection of domestic violence and pregnancy. We know that most of the statistic tells us how prevalent domestic violence is. And we know that according to whatever statistics you look at, 1 in 4 women will be a victim of domestic or sexual violence in their lifetime, 1 in 7 men. But we also know that 1 in 6 women, pregnant women each year, will experience domestic violence. It is estimated that over 373,000 women that are pregnant experience domestic violence in this country every year. Why is this important? This is important, folks, because domestic violence happens to be more common than any other health problem when it comes to women during pregnancy. We understand the fact that domestic violence makes an impact on maternal health, maternal mortality, as well as infant health and infant mortality. So domestic violence during pregnancy presents so many things. And tonight we're going to explore those things. We have some incredible guests that we're going to have with us in just a little bit. But I want to share with you just briefly, just a little clip to help bring this to a conversational point. Stay tuned for just this file. This came on. Here's the screen.
Like most women, you don't get married thinking that your husband is going to go from the knight in shining armor to the nightmare on Elm Street. Being a woman of faith, it played a big part in me wanting to trust and believe that it would change, and not even realizing that I was in domestic violence. What we see a lot of time on the billboards, on the Lifetime movies, is not always what domestic violence look like. I was one of the people that did not think domestic violence could happen to me, and it did. I didn't fit the myth of what domestic violence looked like. I had never seen it in my family. We knew nothing about how to get help. I lost a child at 4 months at the hand of my ex-husband. In my case, my ex-husband at the time was out, saw someone that went to high school with me. That person was just talking about how wonderful I was in high school. And to the jealous abuser, that sounds like, oh, you were a flirt. That just ticked him off. I was actually home, getting ready for bed. And when he got home, he began to tell me I was such a bad person and I must be cheating because this person that he saw sitting at a bar said that I was popular in high school. I really couldn't understand it. He literally stomped me in my stomach. I'm losing the baby here. Something's happening. There was a lot of blood. He said, well, let's just clean it up and make love. When you're being abused during a pregnancy, this is a very dangerous person. The type of person that we hear about on the news that could kill you. And it's about power and control. And it's not always physical abuse. It's power and control through financial abuse, through emotional abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse. However they can maintain or obtain that power and control. I knew it wasn't normal, but I didn't know how do you move forward in a situation when you are truly fearful of your life. If they say they will, they can, and they may. It's hard enough to leave when you're not pregnant. The woman feels like perhaps he will change. I'm having a baby. My child needs a father. This behavior actually worsens when you're pregnant. Exiting my abusive marriage was extremely traumatic and scary, and there was a lot of unknown variables. Find out what can you do. How can you safely get out of this relationship? Safety planning is very, very important.
Domestic violence has a big impact on maternal mortality. It is one of the reasons why mothers lose their lives after giving birth. It's a big part of maternal mortality. The way we work with women at Healthy Women Houston, we connect her to different resources within the community. The process is very safe. Domestic violence can be so tricky to navigate, and you don't want to put her in a worse situation that she's currently in. So they do everything from helping you get financially on your feet to where you can get up and move, to actually placing you in shelters so that if you have an immediate need to leave, then they will find somewhere for you to stay so that you're safe and out of that situation. I think a lot of times we're afraid to leave because we just don't know where we're going to go. Don't let fear stop you from doing what you need to do for yourself and for your child.
Most of the time, people say things that causes the victim to stay. When you say someone, I will never understand that, or I could never stay in that, or you should leave, then the person is like, well, I won't talk to them about it. And when they're actually ready to leave, where do they go? And that's a whole part of the abuser continuing to have power and control because they isolate the victim. So I encourage the family to allow the victim to know that you may not understand, but you're supportive. This is not what love looks like, healthy love looks like, but I'm here for you whenever you're ready. In the meantime, just continue to give love unconditionally.
Well, what a introduction, to say the least, when we look at this issue of domestic violence. And what I would like to do now is to bring on our very special guests. I'm going to bring them on, and I'm going to give a self introduction. Then I will have them to introduce themselves in a more permanent side, should I say, a more, if you would, accurate way of introducing them. So we are fortunate tonight to have with us. I'm going to introduce, first of all, Ms. Shae Spencer. Ms. Shae Spencer is the CEO of YWCA of Palm Beach County. YWCA happens to be, if you would, our oldest domestic violence center, among so many other things that the YWCA does in Palm Beach County. Ms. Shae Spencer has the opportunity to be the CEO over the center that serves women, children, and victims of domestic violence throughout, as much as a lot of other support services. And she's going to do her own self-intro in just a second. And as I then introduce Dr. Louise Buie. Dr. Louise Buie is not only a registered nurse practitioner, but her whole focus has been very much inside of addressing domestic violence and pregnancy. She's currently there at the Great FAU, there with the Cheryl Lynn Center, I believe, there inside of the work that she does. She has been an advocate inside of not only women's issues, but addressing these ills that we're talking about today. And I want to take the time and give a great community voice welcome to the both of you. Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this webinar.
Thank you very much.
Great. So I'm going to start off with you, Ms. Spencer, because the fact you have the privilege and the challenge in many ways of being the CEO of the YWCA of Palm Beach County, which happens also to house inside of many of their programs, the Domestic Violence Center. You're one of over 42 certified centers in the state of Florida. And inside of the work you do, I would like for you to do a self-introduction. And I have a few questions for you before I get to Dr. Bowie.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Dr. Reverend Thicklin, for organizing tonight's event and for giving us the platform to discuss domestic violence and the intersection between pregnancy. I am Shae Spencer, CEO of YWCA of Palm Beach County, and I have over 16 years of nonprofit experience, 10 of them being with United Way of Broward County, where I manage workplace giving campaigns and other community engagement initiatives, before I had the opportunity to transition into the assistant vice president role with Hope South Florida, which is a nonprofit organization in Broward County that provides services for homeless families and veterans. Thereafter, I had the amazing opportunity to serve as the CEO of the Homeless Coalition, and then later transitioned last summer into this amazing, unique opportunity to serve as the YWCA of Palm Beach County CEO. And as you mentioned, Dr. Thicklin, our mission is to eliminate racism and to empower women and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. So while we do have a major presence in Palm Beach County as it pertains to domestic violence, there's so much more that we offer to this community in terms of healthcare, childcare, housing opportunities, as well as racial justice and gender equity programming as well. So thank you so much again for having me here, and I'm excited to participate in tonight's discussion.
Thank you so very much. Dr. Bowie, do us
All
the
right.
honor.
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, and at the same time, very sad that we still have to be discussing domestic violence, also known as intimate partner violence. And it is, we can identify it as a pandemic, actually, because it affects more than 320,000 women. I've had the pleasure and at the same time to work with women in shelter back in Massachusetts when I was working with Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. And it is, and we'll be able to talk a little bit more about it. And that's when, that's where my expertise comes from, and understanding all of that. Currently, I serve as the Assistant Dean of Executive and Continuing Education and academic practice partnership at the Christine E. Lean College of Nursing at FAU. And also, I work as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner at Found Care Inc., which is a federally funded community health center. I have over 25 years in nursing in different arenas. So tonight, I really don't want to talk too much about me and my experiences. I just want to, to be available for questions and this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and hopefully we can bring awareness and at the same time equip women who may be in such situation and do not understand how to get out of those situations, probably shed some light for them, because there is a way out.
Thank you so very much. Well, we're looking forward to it because this is a subject matter that's not always the easiest to talk about, but it's necessary. And it's necessary because of the fact there's probably very few families, if any, that have not been touched by domestic violence in one form or another. We know that statistics have continuously grown, and even during the pandemic, nationally, they said that domestic violence have gone up 8%, mainly due to the fact of that when the pandemic first hit, one of the solutions or one of the ways that we were looking to cut down the spreading of the pandemic was the fact of what we call shelter in place, safe at home. Well, those of us in the domestic violence field, we understood that that was not necessarily the best remedy for victims or people who were potential victims already, because it put them in a place where they were strapped with their abuser, and they were trapped inside of how they could navigate. And I want to address this first question to Shae Spencer, because the fact during that time, we understand across the country, many of the shelters had to do things that was differently. They had to make changes. They had to do things that they hadn't done before, because they was trying to both keep the current clientele safe, and yet it's still how did we serve the other clientele that was now coming in the midst of a pandemic. So I want to ask the question to you: how is it that you all handle that at the YWCA?
Yes. Thank you so much for that question. It indeed was a challenging time for staff at YWCA and for the survivors in our community who rely on us for safety, shelter, and many other services for their survival. The way we handled it at YWCA, our emergency shelter would typically hold a capacity of 72. And because we wanted to do everything in our power to ensure that survivors were safe and that we were maintaining social distance as required by the CDC, we had to unfortunately reduce capacity by nearly 50%, which means that we had less housing, less beds, and less space for mothers and children who were truly in need of a safe haven. We also had to increase our professional cleaning services, which went from $9,000 a year to $30,000 a year. Wow. So we had to make a shift in the budget to accommodate that unexpectedly. But we did extremely well in that regard, with less than 10 participants since the beginning of the pandemic until now actually contracting the virus on our premises. And so we had to make a lot of adjustments. We moved a lot of the services, as many nonprofits and organizations across the nation and across the world did, from in-person to virtual, including therapy sessions and other things that were necessary for participants, economic and social justice programming, financial literacy program that we would typically have in person, where participants would have the opportunity to sit with a qualified professional individual in their field and get information about, things such as opening a bank account, maximizing your savings account, filing for taxes, all these things that survivors need when they're looking to rebuild their lives and essentially start over, because that's exactly what happens when someone is exiting an abusive relationship. Essentially, they are uprooting their lives and essentially starting over. And so we're giving them the tools and the resources to do exactly that. But indeed, it was a challenge. Many of our services halted to some degree. Our childcare center had to close down for a number of months. And when we did resume, we resumed virtually. And when we did resume in person, again, we needed to move to a reduced capacity as well. And so those are some of the ways that we help to navigate but still serve our community, reducing capacity, partnering with new providers in the community to increase services, and just doing as best that we can to provide virtual services to ensure that services were still available for the population that we serve.
That's an amazing job that you did. And believe me, as I'm in touch with so many different centers across the country, I mean, it was amazing just hearing everyone, making those adjustments, because what people might not understand is the fact those survivors and those individuals that was seeking shelter, they was being exposed to the same pandemic that everyone else. But on top of that, the issue of domestic violence going on, which is a world changer all within itself. When we just viewed that video there and you heard the story of the woman who talked about her abuse happening during pregnancy and the fact of what happened, I want you to speak to that, because the fact, we know that, once again, 1 in 6 pregnant women experience domestic violence. And for many of them, they're experiencing domestic violence for the first time during their pregnancy. Does your shelter, do you all accept pregnant women? And if you do, at what stage of gestation do you accept them? Is there a cutoff time? Because, that's a loaded question on the end of that, because I think people need to understand this is it's not an easy thing to navigate. You're expecting, you're dealing with the whole weight of expecting, and now you're also dealing with just trying to survive and trying to stay safe, not only for your life, but the life of your kids and your unborn.
Yeah. Absolutely. YWCA of Palm Beach County absolutely accepts women with or without children who are experiencing domestic violence. As a matter of fact, the majority of the women that come to YWCA for help either have children. Many of them have more than one children, and some of them are actually pregnant when they enter into our program. In the last fiscal year, we actually housed over 375 individuals at our shelter. Of the 375 plus that called our emergency shelter home at some point over the past 12 months, more than 50% of them were children under the age of 18 who were accompanied by an adult parent. And so we have 72 emergency bed shelters, 72 emergency beds at our shelter. And to just put things into perspective for you just a little bit, 54 of those beds are designated to women with children or families, and the remaining 18 are for single women without children. So that kind of gives you an idea. It's really a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of space and bedding. It gives you an idea of the need in our community for services that actually support women with children who are experiencing domestic violence. And, that's a really interesting question that you asked about the cutoff period. There is no cutoff period whatsoever in gestation for YWCA. A woman could be in her first trimester or in her last trimester of pregnancy, and we would accept her into our program. While there are policies and procedures that govern the organization and that we must abide by through our federal funding and the state of Florida, we understand that each woman comes to us at a different time in her life as it pertains to domestic violence. And each of these women have different needs. And so as the oldest and largest multicultural women's organization dealing with domestic violence, one of our philosophies is that there's no one size fits all policy or procedure or services and programs for us. Basically, we operate from a trauma-informed, survivor-centered focus, which means we give the autonomy and the control back to the survivor. By its very nature, domestic violence is about extracting power and maintaining control. So essentially, we work to give that control and power back to the survivor, and we work with them one-on-one to basically come up with a plan that suits their needs, but we put the power and control back in the hands of the survivor.
That is such wonderful information, because it also shows where we've come in the domestic violence movement. When we didn't know better, we thought we was doing the best thing for the survivors. And we learned over the years that, they're the expert on their own experience. And we work with them, they'll help navigate us inside of that. And it brings me to a question for Dr. Buie. Dr. Buie, in your time of working with pregnant women and also in shelter that have been pregnant, what are some of the challenges that brings, because they're not showing up to shelter because they just need a break. I mean, they're showing up to shelter because of the fact their lives are in danger, and many times as a result of domestic violence happening during pregnancy, it puts the baby at risk, it puts the unborn child at risk, it puts the mother at risk, both now and futuristically. So what have been some of your challenges inside of dealing with women that are pregnant and experiencing domestic violence?
Well, the first challenge for these women is actually safety. Even though they are in a safe place, they, those shelters that I used to go to, no one needs to know the address, can know the address. So really keeping the woman safe is the priority. It's the safety. So that's the challenge. The other challenge also, so that they won't be found by their abuser. The other challenge as well is how do you help them continue with their care in terms of prenatal care? So what uh, one of my roles at the time, I used to visit these women in the shelter and do an intake and complete really and just do a quick assessment to see what their needs are while they're in the shelter. And also, even way back when, that was in the 1990s, we allowed the women to actually dictate what they wanted, because some of them wanted to go out of state, meaning that, okay, I can escape and go somewhere else so that my abuser doesn't find me. And so we would work with other different organizations and donors and help them, get a plane ticket, get clothing, if they needed to be followed up. So basically, by providers for prenatal care to continue that. So those used to be challenges. And in terms of getting them health coverage, because now they're not under the abuser's health insurance anymore. So getting health coverage, getting food, and getting them connected. So we work as teams. We had the case managers, the nurses, just to really get the woman going again. And the other thing would be housing. So it could be housing within the state or housing, outside.
So there's a lot of things that are needed inside of a life of a person who was abused, especially pregnant. And I think one of the things that most people might not recognize is that there are different phases of a person being abused when we're talking about being pregnant.
Mhm.
There's what we call coercive reproduction, where we're dealing with an abuser who literally might get the person pregnant on purpose.
Exactly.
Might promise the fact, well, if you just have my baby, I won't be so cranky, I wouldn't fight. And then in other cases, we've had women who actually thought, well, maybe he'll stop, if I just have his baby. And then we get the point where we have the situation where the abuser may control her use or no use or his use of contraceptives or not. Once again, we're talking about this power and this control that happens inside of a relationship, that happens inside of this. And when it comes to domestic violence and seeking those services, and it's so great hearing you both talk about that, but it does take a coordinated effort. I can recall years ago when I worked inside of shelter services, we didn't have a nurse on staff. We didn't have those type of things there. And back then, if a woman was pregnant, she couldn't come if she was 6 months or more. But what we recognize is, as Ms. Spencer said, abuse doesn't necessarily look at the clock and say, "Oh, I think I'll wait till this period to happen." It just does. And so one of the things I want to talk about now is when you start talking about those services, because now you're talking about those services. Most definitely, a pregnant woman going through what she's going through, her needs are a little different, maybe, than women who may not be pregnant or have older kids. How in your center, Ms. Spencer, do you all handle that? Are there community partners you're working with, or what's happening to help coordinate that? Because it is a handful to manage.
Absolutely. There are many coordinated efforts, community partners, and other service providers that work together in Palm Beach County to assist victims of domestic violence and their children. First of all, YWCA Palm Beach County has a domestic violence crisis hotline, which operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We have outreach services. We have partnerships in place with PBSO, Palm Beach Sheriff's Office. We, as an organization, actually provide training to new law enforcement officers. So when they join the force, they know what to look for. They know how to handle calls of domestic violence. And then in addition to that, they reach out to us whenever there is a call in Palm Beach County regarding domestic violence so that we can respond appropriately, and we can, in the most discreet way, reach out to the woman or to the survivor to offer services to that survivor. We have partnerships with Dress for Success, where Mary Hart is the CEO, and she helps with her organization helps us provide assistance with employment opportunities for individuals, including mock interviews, preparing to dress appropriately for interviews. We have a program that we facilitate through Bank of America, which is our financial literacy program. I think you touched a little bit in the beginning of the conversation about financial abuse. Many abusers use finances as an opportunity to further control their partner. And so they may intentionally destroy their credit. They may intentionally decide not to pay bills. They may deplete their savings account because they understand that in order to flee or to leave, the survivor needs resources, right? You may need first, last, and security deposit to pay for an apartment. You might need to secure transportation, and a multitude of other things. And so we provide financial literacy through Bank of America with budgeting, credit repair, tax preparation, all sorts of things. We have educational assistance programs. We work with the Poorest Place, which is located in West Palm Beach. And this organization provides preparation and testing for GED for those individuals who want to earn their GED. And they also provide English classes for those individuals who are learning English as a second language, because that's extremely important. It's not talked about very often, but sometimes survivors are reluctant to seek help because there's a language barrier there. So we have about 6 different languages that we're able to provide services in, including Spanish and Creole for those individuals in our community that need that. We also have a huge partnership with HUD, which provides over $350,000 a year for YWCA to place women and children who are in need in permanent housing. We talked a little bit earlier today about the emergency shelter, where it's really temporary. Women and children are expected to stay about 6 to 8 weeks, but what will they do once they leave our shelter? We have a program in place where we are putting them into permanent housing. They work one-on-one with the case manager that will help them with the house hunting process, if you will, locate an apartment and a landlord that will serve their needs in a community where they're comfortable. We do an inspection of the property to make sure that it's livable. And then YWCA would provide first, last, and security deposits for that family, in addition to any deposits that might be required for utilities as well. And so we have a multitude of services. One of the other services that I'll mention very quickly is we have a full-time paralegal and a full-time attorney that really serves a huge purpose. Many women are fearful about going to court and speaking up about the abuse because they anticipate that their abuser will try to paint them as an unfit mother and essentially try to take their child from them. So we have a full-time paralegal and attorney that will go to court with these individuals and help them file a restraining order if that is necessary, and help them with custody, fight for custody of their child if that is necessary as well. So lots of amazing partnerships. We also do have a partnership with ABDA, which is the only other domestic abuse shelter here in Palm Beach County, and we're able to provide referrals back and forth for free for emergency housing and rapid rehousing as well.
That's awesome information for the viewers and those of you that are viewing. Feel free to share this information as well. If you would you give us your hotline number? I want to make sure that we have that and we've captured that.
Absolutely. The hotline number is 800-973-9922. Again, it is 800-973-9922. And for those individuals who need to dial locally, it's 561-640-9844. Both of those phone numbers can be found on our website at ywcapbc.org.
Wow. Well, we have the assurance of knowing that we do have services for those that are listening. You may say, well, I know someone that's been in an abusive relationship and they've been afraid to because they didn't think there was help for them. But I want to go back to the part here, and Dr. Buie, particularly, I want to talk about domestic violence when a person is pregnant and the effects that domestic violence can have on their pregnancy. Now, we know that goes beyond the punching, and all that definitely is bad enough. But we're talking about the fact of the stress factor that impacts the woman, who ultimately impacts the child. And then not only that, I want you to talk about the fact of, how this lends itself to not only maternal mortality and, as well as infant mortality. And I want to preface it by talking about the fact, earlier when we heard Ms. Spencer talk about the YWCA and their mission of eliminating racism and all those things, and that's YWCA nationally. Though domestic violence affects every gender, nationality, and ethnic group, we also know that Black women are affected disproportionately by domestic violence, and that we know that Black women are 40% more likely to be killed by their partner. And so we know that a lot of things happen there, but I want to direct my question to you as it relates to some of those other impacts of being abused with domestic violence while pregnant. What are some of the other things that is at stake here? Because this is not a walk in the park. This is one of the most dangerous time on such a physical, emotional level, and in every way. So I would love for you to speak to that.
Okay, so thank you for your question. So I know this is a big question, so I'll try to be concise. So basically, some of the outcomes and consequences of abuse during pregnancy, I'll start with health behaviors. So what happens? The woman doesn't seek prenatal care, and even though that they are unfortunately that's what happens. They delay prenatal care, or it is unlike they initiate prenatal care much later. Another thing that happens is basically the maternal mental health. In according to research, and women who are victims of intimate partner violence during pregnancy, they have higher rate of depression during pregnancy and also during the postpartum period. And sometimes we think about, I know we mentioned that earlier, that it might be in the form of, it's not just beating or even verbal abuse, financial abuse, or just stress, or just attitudes. How does the partner react when they find out that there is an additional child coming on? They may not be happy, and it increases stress. They're going to have to take care of one more mouth to feed, and just all of that it's not a period of time that should be a happy time for the family becomes an extremely stressful and depressing time for the woman, and that continues during the pregnancy and during the postpartum period. Another thing as well, so now for the baby, we know that intimate partner violence and neonatal outcomes. So we have, research after research that shows that babies, we have low birth weight and preterm birth, in these babies. We also have small for gestational age, and that could be due because of lack of prenatal care, and the woman not taking care of herself during the pregnancy. You also have perinatal death, and which is what in the video that the woman shared, right?
Right.
So either during the pregnancy you have the death, or early on after delivery. I'm just saying that I'm just heartbroken even thinking about it, that those things can happen during pregnancy. And definitely, you have maternal, and talking maternal death, it's just really, really sad to hear. So those are some of the consequences that happen, the outcomes that happen as a result of domestic violence or intimate partner violence.
As you talked about that, that impact, once again, it spreads across because you're talking about the mental, emotional. And I want to go back to mental because one of the viewers talked about the fact of the part that mental health plays in it. And you went back to, you talked about postpartum depression. And one of the things I think people need to understand is that even if the abuse have stopped, say physically, it doesn't mean that it dissipated with the victim who has suffered from the domestic violence that have happened there. And the question arises: why is it that this person would abuse them during their pregnancy? And research have talked about the fact of their jealousy. She's paying more attention to herself now. The factor of here's another mouth to feed, as you alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
But even beyond that, when we start talking about what happens to her from being punched in the video, the lady there, she talked about the fact that he intentionally, directly kicked her in her stomach.
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, with the purpose of injuring the baby, which could cause everything from bleeding from the uterus,
Yeah.
even a detachment of the placenta. And so, with these things happening, it also complicates when people are seeking help. During pregnancy is a very vulnerable time. You really want to
It
be with the family, you want to be around, but it creates such a dynamic that it's almost impossible to escape an abusive relationship during pregnancy without totally being stressed out, and the stressors also affecting the baby. And I want you to speak to the fact that I know that research has talked about the fact even babies, besides born too small and born too soon, the inability to even to naturally suck or to take the mother's breast, or the inability to sleep and having those type problems. Speak a little bit more to that, because once again, the abuse that we see happening during the pregnancy doesn't necessarily, the effects of it doesn't necessarily stop simply because the person is no longer being physically abused.
Exactly. So I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned. A woman is pregnant, and there is a special connection between you and your baby. And someone is not only attacking the woman, but also attacking that other part of her. And think about how it's the abuse toward the person, and their baby, and that extension of them, how it causes such trauma and pain, the depth of the pain for the woman, and the rejection as well that she suffers. It's like it is unwanted. Not only she's being uh, demeaned against, but also her baby is not wanted. Um, I want to talk about also, we know that based on research as well, that prenatal domestic violence exposure is associated with increased level of trauma symptoms in infants. They are startled easily, and that startling is actually repeated the same without enjoyment. So
Right.
that is something. Also, you have a difficult baby, a baby who can never be consoled.
Right.
There are, because of the domestic violence, and we don't think a lot of times it is thought, well, only the woman, but then you have that baby who is withdrawn, slow to adapt, and generally in a negative mood. So that's like a difficult infant temperament. That's how it is described. You also have later on, childhood behavioral problems, um, physical aggression, disobeying rules, cheating, stealing, destruction of property, also anxiety and depression, early on, attention deficit disorder. And a lot of it we don't realize, and there is more research being done right now in terms of that. It's that effect of the trauma, the post trauma, to the unborn, to the infant, and being exposed, and just all of those behaviors surface as a result of a pain, a deeper pain that those kids, infants and kids are experiencing, and there are no it's trying to find a way to express that, but then the symptoms is manifested as the aggression, the disobedience, the cheating, the stealing, the difficult personality, and just really anger, in them. So all of these things are things to consider. We see kids react different ways, and we think, oh my goodness, this is a bad child. But if you get to know their story and you realize,
Right.
wow, they have been through a lot, not just from um, you know um, doing pregnancy, and you think, well, they were still in utero. No, they're
Right.
still affected. And one thing I want to go back to mention, in terms of abuse escalate during pregnancy. um, a lot of times the women do want to to do some kinds of birth control method. They want,
Right.
but the partner may not agree with that, and the woman ends up pregnant. And
Coercive
it's like, okay,
reproductive. They're being
Yeah.
forced. Yes.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
but she's being blamed for getting pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
it's a very interesting topic to explore, and you make such a good point about reproductive abuse and coercion, because
Mhm.
as you mentioned, not only sometimes are the women prevented from using birth control, they're then blamed when the pregnancy occurs, and then the situation can play out in two different ways.
Mhm.
Sometimes the abuser forces them to carry the
yes.
pregnancy to term when they don't want to, so that creates
Hmm.
another psychological impact on the woman, and in some
Yes.
cases the abuser will even force them to terminate the pregnancy as
Exactly.
another form of control and abuse. And so the laundry list of things that a woman goes through while being abused, but coupled with being pregnant, is exhaustive. And when you
Yeah.
talk about the impacts that abuse has on a child, you know there are long-term effects on a child who just witnesses abuse. So
Absolutely.
imagine the impact of a child who's physically experiencing that inside the womb and then having to experience it after birth. It's truly detrimental.
It is.
And it's the most vulnerable time when we talk about that. And you both make very great points because, once again, we talk about domestic violence being a learned behavior. But could you imagine this being, I mean, intuitively, you think about what happens to a child before they even get into the world. We understand that, 28 to 30% of all fetal abnormalities are due to domestic violence. So even those that might make it through the process of being born, oftentimes could be suffering from other mental situations, physical disabilities, or if you would, even in cases, deformity as a result of what has happened during the pregnancy, which brings us all to that point about the importance of the community and people being aware, really, that domestic violence is not, I love the way that video started, that, oftentimes we're misled by what we see on television. It's not always just a slap in the head. It's not always, the stabbing. A lot of time it is the enormous mental, emotional abuse. Couple that with the fact of financial, economical abuse, it takes us a whole different place. Not to mention
Hmm.
sexual abuse and feeling that you have nowhere to go. And that's where I think that the empathy of our conscience need to be very much heightened. and aware of the fact of that impact on that pregnant woman. And then you think about what happens, because it's not always easy to navigate. Family members oftentimes, they step back and say, well, I don't want to get involved in your situation. Or those who have gotten involved, they felt like they was burned because the victim, returned back to the perpetrator, not understanding that's part of the cycle that happens. But the education I think we need to understand is that domestic violence never singularly impact just the victim, survivor, or the abuser. It impacts everyone that is connected to them in any way. Children who are, children, you mentioned children witnessing and being exposed to domestic violence, it's up to 12 million a year. When we're seeing that happen, where did it plays out at? It plays out in their behavior. We see it played out in school. We see it played out in society. And as a result of it, it speaks to the fact, while there has to be more education addressing domestic violence, more education understanding the fact of, there's no one entity that can address this alone, because domestic violence walks in on every disciplinary in our society, whether it's educational, whether it's medical, whether it's even the business community, because we talk about domestic violence in the workplace, the number of people who are killed at work or injured. And so when we speak to that, I think about all of your world, both of your world encompasses two things: dealing with victims, dealing with survivors in some case, dealing with finding safety, dealing with trying to get their lives together. And I thought you did such a great job, both of you, but Ms. Spencer, you talked about all of those services. And when you start looking at it, it just grows. So, all those safety is number one. But you talking about the potter wants to put you back together again. That's not an easy thing. There's so many things that happen. You deal with it now, and so much is being, you talk about trauma-informed care, and you talk about the fact that we have to be retrained to understand how do we even deal with victims and how we deal with survivors. And the fact of, even in the school system today, guidance counselors now are needing to be trained more so in addressing the issues of domestic violence. Many of them in time past before training, oftentimes would put the kid out of the room, go to the office, not even understanding here's a kid who just went through this whole situation the night before, maybe hiding in a closet, witnessing mom and dad, a mom and mom partner inside of abuse. So it brings us back to understanding now. We talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. All of these things here are part of our society, and all of these things stem out of abuse. So I want to give you both an opportunity to speak to that, and I'll start with you, Ms. Spencer, and we'll end with Dr. Buie. You see it. I know in shelter, you get families in there sometime, and it's, and as much as we try to just, go that, it's hard not to be touched by people who are going through these type things there, and and wanting to find a way to help them. What has been some of your successes, and what have been some of your challenges?
Oh, yes. Some of the successes really are centered around community collaborations. It really is a community-wide effort to serve this vulnerable population, building relationships with corporations who can assist with funding. I'm thankful for the partnership that we have with law enforcement. If you're familiar, there was a time, and it still happens to some degree now, where law enforcement will find a woman on the street, whether it's domestic abuse or sex trafficking, and say, well, you're doing something wrong here, and they will lock them up. But now that we have a better relationship between the agency, the service provider, and law enforcement, what we're seeing is that they are able now to identify the signs of sex trafficking and domestic violence, and they can ask the appropriate questions and get that survivor the help that she needs. Immediately call an agency, put them in the back of your squad car and transport them to safety or what have you. So those are some of the successes that we have been experiencing. We're getting lots of support from the federal government in terms of funding for lots of different things. In any given year, we are bringing in and out on a 12-year time span nearly 400 women and children. So that foot traffic creates a lot of I don't want to say mess, but it's the foot traffic. You need to manage it, right? So we have to upkeep the
Right.
property. We want women and children, when they come, to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to feel secure. This is a place for them to rebuild and to be uplifted. And so we're getting funds to maintain the property so that it's comfortable for people to come and say that, you know, I want to get myself in the right state of mind to do what I need to do to build my self-sufficiency. So we're seeing a lot of challenges with that. We're being offered training, and we're able to partner with different, partners in the community on training. I know that we recently participated in a training that was hosted by Florida Atlantic University, and I'm super proud of the newly formed partnership that we have with the Community Health Center at Florida Atlantic University, which provides increased access to affordable health care for women at the shelter, but also for women of color, especially African American and Hispanic women, as they are experiencing this increased disparity when it comes to accessing healthcare. So I'm very thankful for that. So again, lots of partnerships, increased funding to provide support in areas where we may have lacked in the past. Some of the challenges that I can speak to very quickly, and Dr. Bowie talked about some of them. Safety is the number one issue for women who are experiencing domestic abuse, whether they are in shelter or not, and whether they are pregnant or not. We talked a little bit, Dr. Thicklin, you talked about the family and how they sometimes don't want to overstep boundaries, and sometimes family and friends feel slighted because they provided support and the survivor went back to the abuser. That happens a lot. But I think one of the ways we combat that is to raise awareness and continue to educate the community. People might say, why did she go back? Why doesn't she just leave? And you talked about the lockdown in the beginning of this conversation. And the fact of the matter is, sometimes being at home with the abuser is the most dangerous place in the world for a woman. But also, what some people don't realize is that leaving that abusive relationship is even more dangerous.
Absolutely.
The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence has reported, and this is a statistic that I pay a lot of attention to because it is so daunting, and I think we need to share it more. A woman is 70 times more likely to lose her life at the hands of her abuser within the several week time period in which she has left. So
Absolutely.
It's actually more dangerous and more fatal for her to leave. And if we drop that zero and we looked at, let's just take 7%. If you increase your risk factor of diabetes, cardiac arrest, cancer, anything by 7%, that would be a cause of concern for you, for anyone. But women who are leaving an abusive relationship are 70 times more likely to lose their lives. So safety is always a major concern, again, whether they're pregnant or not, whether they're in shelter or not. Dr. Bowie talked about housing. That is always a factor because across the county and across the nation, affordable housing is unattainable, to say the least. When you are a woman who's experiencing abuse and you have a child, you need more space, right? More space means more money, and it's already unaffordable. So how do you find space to suit your needs and to suit the needs of your child? So we're finding that to be a challenge. As I mentioned, we do have a program that is funded each year by HUD. We get over $350,000 to provide permanent housing for domestic abuse survivors. So those are some things that become a challenge for us. And then, of course, just continuing to service the survivor. You talked a little bit about the mental health issues that women experience, but you're absolutely right, Dr. Thicklin. Once the abuse stops, the impact still remains. They have depression.
Yes.
They experience anxiety. Some of them experiment with drugs and alcohol to cope with their depression, and suicide. Suicide and attempted suicide is a very real thing for domestic abuse survivors. So one of the other things is the distortment of reality, right? The abuser gets very tactical and very successful in leading them to believe that some things are true which are not actually true, and then those things which are not true are true. So it's manipulation and gaslighting and distorting reality for them. So how do you come back from that without the appropriate services? We do have both individual and group counseling for those survivors who are interested. But those are some of the successes that we've experienced, as well as some of the challenges.
Wow, so wonderfully put, and we have a lot of hope from what we're hearing. Dr. Bowie, you're going to get ready to take us home, because the fact, inside of your work of not only working directly with women that have been pregnant and been in shelter, and now even in the School of Nursing, and all of these things now are so important. And so we talk about now where, years ago, especially in the state of Florida, but it's basically nationally now, where basically when it came to women health and healthcare period, we came up with what we call this universal screening, right? Health screening that made it more easier to identify, if you would, whether or not a woman was in an abusive relationship, an abusive situation.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the emergency rooms are flooded oftentimes with women that are coming there, and really their main reason is domestic violence, although many of them, in order to be, they get there to, they may get there and say, well, I walked into the door, I failed. But because of the proper screening and the proper type of question, we're able to identify them, which means that in able to identify, we can refer them to the proper services. Talk to us about that experience and the necessity for us to continue to increase education around. I mean, just on every level, I believe that the conversation about domestic violence has to be almost normalized, that we can talk about it, and understanding the fact when we talk about it, we can talk about it with conviction, and that we can then all realize that we can play a part in helping to reduce it.
Okay, great. So I'll try to be concise, as I've mentioned before, because there is so much to cover. But the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force, USPSTF recommendation that actually to screen women of childbearing age for intimate partner violence, and provide or refer, there's women who screen positive for intervention. And then also, the recommendation applies to women who do not have signs or symptoms of abuse. Because a lot of times, depending on how a woman, dresses herself and comes to the appointment, or go to an office or wherever it is, you cannot just pay attention to the look, at the time, because
Yes,
look can be deceiving, right?
absolutely.
Because also there's a lot of shame associated with intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and that's why, I'll talk from the provider side and from nursing side. That's why we need to, develop that relationship with our clients, and make them feel at ease, in order to, and the same way that we are, um, screening them for gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and everything else, then they also need to be screened for domestic violence as well. And we ask them about alcohol, drugs, smoking, and all of those things, and even stress sometimes. But we don't realize that actually, all of the impact that it can have, and that we've already talked about. Also, there are some great tools that are available to test women when they are going through domestic violence. Those are available online on the USPSTF um, website. One other things, one barrier that exists for providers actually is time constraint. You know, you you may have 20 patients on your schedule for the day. And how do you
Right.
get to talk to a woman and make her feel okay? Because it takes a little time for someone to open up. And if you don't have that time, then you miss the opportunity. But also remember that during pregnancy, a woman will have between 12 to 13 prenatal visits. So there is always, if a provider says, okay, at this visit, at visit number 4, After, I get to know this person, I will ask this question. Or as part of the initial visit, I ask it, and I ask that question at every visit.
Yes.
So things like that, to make it as a normal part of the assessment of their doing pregnancy. Then maybe at some point during the prenatal visit, during the 9-month period, then that person will open up. There are other things also, a need for privacy. Sometimes the offender is right there with the patient, so that presents a barrier. Also, perceived lack of power to change the problem. Like it's like the provider, you think, okay, well, there's nothing I can do here. We don't have a case manager. We don't have this. Or I don't know all the resources that are available in the community. And that's why it's so important. I'm glad that we're having this. Um, Together, so that other people can realize that, okay, there is help is available. And also misconception regarding who may be a victim of domestic violence.
Yes.
Those are
Yes.
barriers as well. I just want to quickly say also, in terms of what does the Affordable Act cover. So all marketplace actually plans and many other plans must cover those domestic and interpersonal violence screening and counseling for all women without charging a copay or co-insurance. So, and this is true even if the patient has not met their yearly deductible. Other thing also, that Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services also provide information about the coverage on preventive services. Healthcare.gov provides a list of preventive care benefits for all adults and those specific to women. So it's really important to know where to find that information. And so really grateful to be able to share all of that.
I love it. Any information that you can, I'm trying to put it on the screen so that people can grab it for its numbers and information. But I think, and let me say this as we get ready to wrap up, you all have really provided a wealth of information, which is so important inside of this. And though I knew a lot of it, I feel a lot safer already. I feel better because the fact I know that we are coming together, particularly in Palm Beach County, with the newest venture with the community coordinated care community. When we look at the work that happens with the bridge between Palm Beach County Victim Services and all the other agencies and coming together, because this is not a issue that is done that can be addressed in a box. Engage in the faith community, engage in the health community. All of these things are so important in addressing domestic violence. And I want to say, part of our role there with Community Voice Program, as the curriculum is all about reducing Black infant mortality or infant mortality, is that there is a particular section where we actually deal with the whole fact of domestic violence and pregnancy and domestic violence and alcohol and drugs and all of these things. And when you have these issues, and I think you talked about it earlier, that you know oftentimes women that are abused, just like anyone else, they might find themselves drinking or using drugs in order to mask or to deal with that hurt and that pain. So it only compounds the issue here, which lends the fact that is why domestic violence is such an issue. I used to call it's an equal opportunity destroyer, but it's a generational thing. It really destroys generations. And we can only break that cycle when we are all coming together, being empowered, being educated, and being engaged in this. Having said that, I want to give final words to you both. Start with you, Dr. Buie.
All right, great. As I mentioned in my introduction, is that I will, if I'm speaking to any woman right now, and if you're looking at me, you can do it. There is a way out. Don't be afraid, reach out. Also, you know, I know I don't have much time right now to go through a safety plan, but get together a friend that you can, or reach out to the YWCA and really reach out to find help to develop a safety plan. Save a little money, pack a bag that you can run with, and take care of your baby. So I just want to let every woman out there know that there is help available. Please reach out. Please reach out. You can get out of this. It's possible.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Ms. Spencer.
Thank you, Dr. Thicklin, for the opportunity, and Dr. Bowie for sharing this space with me and for giving us the opportunity, the platform to really talk about something that is so prevalent in our community. I'll leave with just, I'd like to share one resource. Earlier this year, I read a book. It is called What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry. And it sheds a lot of good light on the way trauma and abuse impacts children and adults, and how it follows you, and what sorts of treatments are most impactful and successful. So I certainly want to share that. And then I will just close by echoing Dr. Bowie. Help is out there. There are many women that overcome these situations. You can visit our website at www.ywcapbc.org for more information. There are discrete ways that you may obtain information and get help. You do not have to leave your premises and come and live at our shelter to get help. You don't have to do that. You can call and receive services through our outreach programming, and you do not need to uproot yourself if you do not want to do that. Dr. Bowie talked about safety planning, which is integral to survival. We do provide safety planning for both adults and children, because when you think about it, we would not expect a 6-year-old to respond to an emergency the same way that we would expect a 30-year-old to. So we have customized safety planning for adults and for children, which are age appropriate. And again, if you are experiencing domestic abuse or violence, there is help out there. There's lots of resources, and there are discrete ways that you can maintain your safety and secure the help that you need. And I encourage you to do that. So.
Well, ladies, I thank you both. You actually answered in your closing. There was one of the questions that just came to me where they were saying, what are the options for minors? And once again, they can still call the hotline. They can still seek services there. And there's help. We are really very fortunate in Palm Beach County to be able to have services that are available there. And I also want to make mention, too, while we're here, I want to thank also the community partners of South Florida and all the Bridges programs of Palm Beach County that's under there, as well as Children's Home Society, the Bridges programs there, because our bridges are located, it's 10 different ones located in Palm Beach County, and they're oftentimes are serving some of our most vulnerable communities. And these type of services and information is very instrumental to them. So I want to thank each one of the Bridges directors out there. I want to thank Ms. Charlotte Wright, the engagement director for these bridges, and for all of them for what they're doing as well. I want to also say on behalf of our CEO, Ms. Shalonda Warren with the Sickle Cell Foundation, thank you all. Thank you all for lending this. And we're looking forward to even greater partnership inside of this. Mm-hmm. Domestic violence is one of those issues that we all can play a part in. So we actually run our program by this proverb that says that it takes a village to raise a child. And if that's true, it takes a village to save one. But in the spirit of what we must do to continue to find answers and do the best to reduce domestic violence and other social ills and determinants, I believe an African proverb that said, many hands makes the load lighter. So with that in mind, thank you all so very much for your time. I'm looking forward to it. The audience, I'm going to invite you to please share, like, send it to someone. You'll find this even will be on YouTube. And let's continue to share and help eradicate, if you would, domestic violence. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us. Once again, Ms. Shae Spencer, CEO of the YWCA Palm Beach County, and Dr. Bowie, I thank you so much. You know, we are very fortunate here to know that we have partners and have individuals such as yourself that are able to not only provide information, education, but to connect us to the services that we need. So once again, thank you so very much, and good night to everybody.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.